There is a kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with how much you slept. You wake up, and before the day has made a single demand of you, before the phone has lit up, before the calendar has reminded you of what is coming, before a single word has been spoken in the room, you are already tired, not in your body, something deeper than that, a weight that sits somewhere behind your chest, a low, persistent drain that you have become so skilled at carrying that most people around you cannot even see it. But you feel it. You have felt it for longer than you would like to admit. And somewhere inside you, in the part of you that chose to press play on something like this today, you already know that this exhaustion is not random. It is not who you are. It is not a permanent condition. It is what you are carrying. There are things in your life right now, things that are draining your energy every single day, not loudly, not obviously, not in ways that are easy to name or explain to another person. Quietly, steadily, invisibly, and because they are quiet, because they do not announce themselves as problems, you have kept them. You have built your routines around them. You have, in many cases, built entire versions of yourself around maintaining them. This is not a motivational video. It is not about pushing harder, waking up earlier, adding more to an already full life. It is about 5 things you must quietly eliminate from your life. Because right now, today, they are costing you the very thing you are trying to protect: your energy, your clarity, your capacity to be fully present in the life you are actively building. These are not the loud things. You already know the loud things. These are the quiet ones, the ones that feel like loyalty, like responsibility, like simply who you are, the ones that have become so woven into your daily experience that you have stopped noticing they are draining you at all. We are going to name them together, understand them honestly, and begin the quiet work of eliminating them, not with disruption, not with drama, but with the kind of steady, clear intentionality that is the signature of a life being lived on purpose. If you are a quiet thinker, if you are someone who processes the world deeply, who moves without noise but feels everything, who values the long view over the quick reaction, this space was built for you. Stay here. What follows will ask something of you. Not effort, honesty, and honesty, when it is met with the right quality of stillness, is the most powerful thing you have access to. Before we move into the 5 things, I want to offer you a frame, because the way you approach what comes next will determine what you actually receive from it. Each of the 5 things we are going to examine together is not a character flaw, not evidence that something is broken in you, not a verdict on your discipline or your worth or the quality of your choices. They are patterns, patterns that were adopted at some point for a reason, because they served you, because they helped you navigate something difficult, manage something overwhelming, or survive an environment that consistently asked more from you than it ever gave back. Here is the truth about patterns like these. The problem is not that you adopted them. The problem is that they stayed, and what once protected you can over time become the very architecture that keeps you confined. The drain you feel, that persistent, sourceless exhaustion that no amount of rest seems to fully resolve, is almost always the hidden cost of maintaining patterns that no longer need to exist. That is what a quiet elimination is, not a dramatic purge, not a confrontation, not an announcement to anyone, but a quiet, deliberate, methodical removal of what has outlived its purpose. For each of the 5 things we are about to move through, we will follow the same structure. We will name it clearly, so it can no longer hide in the background of your days. We will trace its invisible cost, the specific, often unnamed way it is drawing from your energy reserves beneath the surface. We will understand why you kept it, because understanding is not the same as excusing, and the why is always where the compassion lives. And then we will prescribe the protocol, the quiet, specific, actionable path for beginning its elimination, without chaos, without burning anything down, without becoming someone you do not recognize on the other side. This is the work of this session. Move slowly through it, return to the sections that land most heavily, and trust this. The moment of recognition, the quiet internal shift of, yes, that is me, is already the beginning of the release. Chronic urgency. We arrive now at chronic urgency, the first of the 5 things you must quietly eliminate from your life, and the one most likely to have spent years disguised as a virtue rather than a drain. For as long as you can remember, urgency has felt like proof that you are a serious person, that you care enough, that you are doing what is required of you. But by the time we move through this chapter together, you will see it clearly. Not as discipline, as a quiet, relentless leak on your energy, one that has been costing you more than you have ever been able to calculate. The problem. Chronic urgency is not a busy schedule. It is not the temporary pressure of a deadline, or the intensity of a demanding season of work. It is a permanent internal state, the experience of everything being slightly too important, slightly too at risk of going wrong, for you to ever fully exhale. You know it, and not because your calendar is overwhelming. You know it because rest feels irresponsible, because silence feels like a warning, like something must be wrong if nothing is currently demanding your attention. You know it because your body holds tension that the actual situation does not require, and because even when the work is finished, even when the evening is yours, a part of you is still scanning the horizon, still monitoring, still waiting for what might need managing next. You know it because your mind rarely truly settles, even in the moments that were supposed to be yours. That is chronic urgency, and it is not a personality type. It is a nervous system that has been calibrated to emergency, long after the emergency has passed. The invisible cost. Here is what no one talks about when they talk about urgency. It does not only exhaust your body, it progressively narrows your capacity to think. When the brain operates from a state of urgency, it activates the threat response system. The amygdala, the brain's fire alarm, takes command. And when the fire alarm is running, the prefrontal cortex goes quiet. The prefrontal cortex is where your long-range thinking lives, your strategic vision, your considered judgment, your ability to hold complexity, to sit with a problem long enough to understand it rather than react to it. In a sustained state of urgency, that part of you is not fully available. And so, something quietly devastating begins to happen. Everything starts to feel equally important. The email that needs a response and the genuine crisis that requires immediate action carry the same emotional weight in your body. And the minor inconvenience and the significant problem become neurologically indistinguishable. You spend enormous reserves of energy managing things that do not deserve that level of energy. You exhaust yourself on small fires, and the important things, the things that require deep focus and unhurried attention and the kind of presence that actually produces results, they wait. They always wait. Because urgency always feels more urgent. There is a second cost that is less visible but more damaging over time. When you live in urgency long enough, you begin to equate exhaustion with effort. You develop the belief that if you are not tired, you are not trying hard enough. If things feel calm, something is being neglected. If you are resting, someone somewhere is outworking you. And so you create urgency even when none exists, finding the next problem to manage, locating the next fire to monitor. Because the absence of urgency has come to feel more threatening than the urgency itself. This belief, this unconscious equation of depletion with diligence, is one of the most expensive things you are currently carrying, and it is built entirely on false architecture. Why you kept it. Chronic urgency is extraordinarily seductive because it masquerades as care. It presents itself as evidence that you take things seriously. For quiet people, for people who were conditioned early in life to tie their worth to their reliability and output, urgency became the signal that they were doing enough, that they could not be faulted. Being calm felt dangerous. Being unhurried felt like being behind. And the world consistently rewarded the urgency, calling you dependable, capable, giving you more because you always found a way to hold more. The email went to you because you always responded. The problem landed with you because you always found a solution. The relationship leaned on you because you were always available. And so the urgency deepened until it stopped being a response to external pressure, until it became the frequency you lived on, until it felt so woven into how you moved through the world that it simply felt like you. The protocol. The quiet elimination of chronic urgency does not begin with doing less. It begins with interrupting the signal before it hardens into a state. The first practice is deceptively simple and almost unbearable in its simplicity. 3 times each day. At moments you choose in advance, not in response to a demand. You stop, not to meditate, not to breathe in a prescribed pattern, simply to exist, without urgency, for 2 minutes. You do not reach for the phone, you do not find the next task, you do not open the inbox or review the list. You sit with the specific discomfort of having nothing to manage. This will feel almost intolerable at first. And that intolerable feeling is the most important data you will encounter in this practice. It is showing you precisely how dependent your nervous system has become on the urgency state. The fact that stillness feels like a problem is the confirmation that you need this practice more than you know. The second part of the protocol is what I call the consequence audit. Before you act on any sense of urgency, before you reach, respond, or redirect your attention toward the signal, you ask yourself one question. If I do not act on this within the next 24 hours, what is the actual consequence? Not the felt consequence, not the anxiety of leaving it unresolved. The actual, concrete, real-world consequence to your life and the lives of people who depend on you. You will discover, with remarkable consistency, that 90% of what your nervous system marks as urgent has no meaningful consequence if it waits. Naming that clearly and honestly, not once, but every time the signal arrives, is how the recalibration begins. Over weeks of this practice, the urgency begins to quiet. Not because your life becomes less full, but because you have built the capacity to distinguish between what is genuinely pressing and what has simply been assigned urgency by a system that forgot how to rest. That distinction, that small, unglamorous daily distinction, is worth more than any productivity framework you have ever encountered. Because productivity built on urgency is not productivity. It is depletion moving quickly. And the life you are building requires more from you than speed. It requires presence. Emotional caretaking without reciprocity. We arrive now at emotional caretaking without reciprocity, the second of the 5 things you must quietly eliminate from your life, and perhaps the most disorienting one on this entire list. Because this drain is not rooted in a flaw. It is rooted in one of the most genuinely beautiful things about you, your capacity to care for the people around you. What we are going to discover together here is the precise mechanism by which that beautiful capacity became one of the most consistent leaks on your energy, and the quiet, specific protocol for beginning to reclaim what has been given away. The problem. Emotional caretaking without reciprocity is the pattern of consistently managing the emotional world of the people around you, without any comparable return. It is not the same as being caring. Caring is a gift freely offered. Emotional caretaking without reciprocity is a drain. It is the experience of being the person everyone calls when their world falls apart, while yours quietly accumulates its own weight with nowhere to go. It is the constant, low-level monitoring of other people's moods, the instinctive adjustment of your own tone, your energy, your presence, to accommodate theirs. It is shrinking yourself so that others can expand. It is absorbing conflict so that others can have peace. It is being deeply and finely attuned to what everyone around you needs, while the question of what you need remains permanently unasked. Not because no one cares, but because you stopped asking. You learned, somewhere along the way, that your role was to tend to the garden of other people's emotional lives, and that your own was something to manage privately, quietly. Later. Later never comes. The cost of emotional caretaking without reciprocity is not simply tiredness. It is the gradual erosion of access to yourself. When you are consistently the emotional regulator for others, you train yourself to prioritize their internal state over your own. Over time, this training produces a very specific and painful result. You lose the ability to accurately read what is happening inside you. You become extraordinarily good at reading the room, knowing when your partner is approaching a difficult moment before they do, knowing when your colleague is fragile before the meeting begins, knowing when to go quiet, when to soften, when to make yourself smaller so the environment around you remains manageable for everyone else. But you have lost fluency in your own interior language. You have become a skilled translator for everyone else's experience, and a stranger to your own. There is a second cost that arrives more slowly and lands more heavily. When you operate as the emotional infrastructure for the people in your life, they stop building their own, not because they are deliberately unkind, but because they do not have to. You are always there, and so the relationship develops an invisible architecture, where your stability is taken as a given, and their instability is treated as the urgent matter. Your equilibrium becomes furniture, present, functional, rarely acknowledged, and quietly, deeply, over months and years of this arrangement, something hollows out. You begin to wonder if anyone truly sees you, not the version of you that is managing everything, the version that is sometimes struggling too. That question, that quiet, rarely spoken question, is the weight of the drain made conscious. Why you kept it? You kept this pattern because it made you indispensable. And for people who grew up in any degree of uncertainty about their worth or belonging, indispensability feels like safety. If they need you, they will not leave. If you are the one holding things together, you cannot be removed from the picture. The emotional caretaking began, in most cases, not as a choice, but as a survival strategy. In environments where your own needs were not reliably attended to, you learned to attend to others as the primary means of maintaining connection. The logic was simple. If I can keep everyone around me okay, then I will be okay too. That made complete sense in the environment that created it. It was not weakness. It was intelligence applied to the resources available. But you are no longer in that environment, and the pattern stayed. It followed you into friendships, into partnerships, into workplaces, into spaces where your safety was no longer contingent on everyone else's stability. And it is still running, still draining, still costing you the very energy you need to show up fully in your own life. The protocol. The quiet elimination of emotional caretaking without reciprocity does not begin with withdrawal. It does not require a confrontation or an announcement or a dramatic shift in how you show up. It begins with noticing. For 7 days. You are not asked to change anything. You are only asked to observe. Notice the moments when you instinctively monitor someone else's emotional state before they have expressed anything to you. Notice what happens in your body when you do. Notice whether any comparable curiosity or attention is ever directed toward you in return. Notice who asks how you are, and then waits for a genuine answer. This noticing period is not about building resentment. It is about building an honest picture. At the end of 7 days, you will know, with remarkable clarity, which relationships in your life are genuinely reciprocal, and which ones are drawing from a well that no one is refilling. The second part of the protocol is the practice of staying in your own emotional lane before entering someone else's. Before you respond to another person's emotional state, before you adjust, absorb, soften, manage. You pause. You check your own. Not to make the conversation about you, but to ensure that you are arriving as a full person rather than as a function. You ask yourself, what is happening in me right now? This question, asked simply and honestly, begins to interrupt the automatic caretaking reflex. It inserts a moment of self-recognition into a pattern that has long operated on pure autopilot. Over time, that moment expands, and as it expands, you begin to notice that you have more to offer, not because you are giving less, but because you are arriving from a full place rather than an empty one. One final note on this chapter. Not all relationships will survive the recalibration. Some were built entirely on the architecture of your availability, your willingness to be whatever the other person needed at the cost of what you needed. When you stop erasing yourself, those relationships lose their foundation. That is not a loss. That is clarity. And clarity, even when it carries grief, is always less expensive than the slow, quiet drain of a relationship built on your depletion. There is an ancient instruction that speaks directly to this, quietly and without condition. In the book of Mark, chapter 12, verse 31, it is written, "Love your neighbor as yourself." Not instead of yourself, not at the expense of yourself, as yourself. The self is not the obstacle to love. The self, tended honestly and with care, is the very ground from which genuine love grows. Whether you call it God or the universe, or simply the deep intelligence of a life honestly examined, the principle remains the same. You were not built to be depleted. You were built to be whole. The explanation habit. We arrive now at the explanation habit, the third of the 5 things you must quietly eliminate from your life, and the one most likely to be spending your energy not in the conversations themselves, but in the space between them. It presents itself as transparency, as integrity, as simply being someone who values honesty about who they are and why they do what they do. But what this video will quietly reveal is that the compulsion to explain yourself is one of the most consistent and invisible drains on your daily energy. The freedom on the other side of releasing it is a quality of peace you may not have experienced in a very long time. The problem. The explanation habit is the compulsion to justify your choices, your boundaries, your preferences, your absence, your no, to people who did not ask for the justification, and who in many cases were not going to be moved by it regardless. You know it because it lives in the paragraphs you write before the message you actually meant to send. It is the apologetic preamble before the boundary, the backstory you provide for a decision that required no backstory, the rehearsed speech constructed internally in quiet moments before a difficult conversation. You anticipate resistance and build a defense for a prosecution that may never arrive. And even when it never arrives, you will have spent hours of genuine energy preparing for it. The explanation habit is born from one of the most human needs there is, the need to be understood. That need is not the problem. The problem is where it is being directed, because most of the explanations you offer are being offered to people who have already decided how they feel about you, and no amount of carefully constructed reasoning changes a verdict that was never reached through reason. The invisible cost. The cost of the explanation habit is almost entirely invisible because it happens not in the conversations themselves, but in the space between them. It lives in the anticipation, in the rehearsal, in the 3 drafts before the one you actually send, in the replaying of the exchange afterward, wondering whether you said it the right way, whether they understood, whether it landed as intended. This is an enormous expenditure of mental energy, spent on interactions that do not require it, on people who are not waiting for it, on outcomes that your explanation, however perfectly constructed, will not meaningfully change. But there is a deeper cost beneath the surface cost of mental bandwidth. Every time you construct an explanation for a choice that did not require one, you are implicitly communicating something to yourself. You are telling yourself that your choice was not fully legitimate without the approval of the person you are explaining it to, that your no requires context to be valid, that your decision is subject to the review of others before it can be allowed to stand. Research by social psychologist Brené Brown on shame and vulnerability confirms what quiet people have long felt but rarely named. The over-explanation pattern is not simply a communication habit. It is shame-based behavior, a deeply conditioned response to the fear that without sufficient justification, you will be found inadequate, that the choice itself, without its elaborate defense, will reveal something about you that cannot be respected. And over months and years of this pattern, the quiet self-trust that comes from acting from your own clear knowing begins to erode. Not dramatically, not all at once, but gradually. The center of gravity shifts. You begin making decisions not from your own authority, but from the management of how those decisions will need to be explained. You are no longer living from the inside out. You are living from the outside in. And the energy required to maintain that orientation is more than you know. Why you kept it. The explanation habit is maintained by a belief that most quiet people carry deeply and rarely examine. The belief that if people understood you well enough, they would not be disappointed by you. For people who are deeply empathic, and most quiet thinkers are deeply empathic, disappointing someone is one of the most uncomfortable experiences available. Not because you cannot handle discomfort, but because your capacity to feel another person's disappointment is genuinely heightened. You feel it in the room before they express it. You feel it in the quality of their silence. The explanation habit is the preemptive attempt to prevent that feeling by ensuring that no one could possibly misunderstand your intentions. But the painful truth it quietly protects you from is this: understanding does not prevent disappointment. People who wanted to be disappointed by you will find a way to be disappointed, regardless of how thorough your explanation was, regardless of how carefully you accounted for every possible objection. And the people who are genuinely in your corner rarely required the explanation in the first place. They trusted your choice before you justified it. They will trust the next one too. The protocol. The quiet elimination of the explanation habit begins with the practice of the clean answer. A clean answer is a response that contains your decision without its defense. I'm not going to be able to make it. Not. I am so sorry. It has just been such an overwhelming few weeks, and I really do wish I could be there, but I am not available for that right now. Not. I know this might seem sudden, and I want you to know it is nothing personal, but I have been feeling really stretched, and I think I just need to. The clean answer does not apologize for existing. It does not justify itself into legitimacy. It states what is true. This will feel deeply uncomfortable at first, particularly for people who have spent years believing that a boundary without a justification is a form of unkindness. It is not. A clean answer is one of the most respectful things you can offer another person, because it treats them as an adult who is capable of receiving honest information without needing you to soften it into apology. The second part of the protocol is learning to distinguish between accountability and appeasement. Accountability is taking genuine responsibility for something that caused genuine harm. It involves honest acknowledgement, a repair, and a changed behavior. It has direction, and it serves the relationship. Appeasement is offering explanations and apologies to manage someone else's discomfort, regardless of whether any actual harm was caused. It diffuses tension temporarily, but it does not serve anyone. It simply costs you. When you feel the pull toward the explanation, ask yourself which of these two things you are actually doing. If it is accountability, the explanation is warranted. Offer it with full intention and genuine care. If it is appeasement, let it go. Set it down. The self-aware person knows the difference, even when the feeling in the body makes them almost identical. The energy you recover from this practice alone will be significant, not immediately, but over weeks and months of building the muscle of the clean answer, You will notice something quiet and important has shifted. Your decisions will feel more like yours again. Your internal voice will be easier to hear, and the life you are building, very slightly but unmistakably, will feel more like it belongs to you. The comparison trap. We arrive now at the comparison trap, the fourth of the 5 things you must quietly eliminate from your life, and the one that is most skilled at disguising itself as something reasonable. It presents itself as awareness, as ambition, as simply staying informed about what is happening in the world around you. What this chapter will trace, precisely and without judgment, is the mechanism by which that reasonable awareness became one of the most consistent drains on your daily energy, and the quiet, honest protocol for dismantling it without losing your drive. The problem, the comparison trap, is not envy. Envy is a loud emotion with a clear target and a specific person attached to it. This is quieter than envy. This is the sustained habit of measuring your internal world, your private progress, your real doubts, your genuine pace, against someone else's external performance. You are measuring something private and unpolished against something that has been specifically constructed for public presentation, against the curated, visible, highlight-edited version of what another person's life and work appear to be from the outside. And because that structural imbalance is built into the comparison before you even begin, you will come up short. Not because you are behind, but because the measurement was rigged against you from the first moment you made it. You encounter evidence of someone else's achievement, and something rises in you that is difficult to name precisely. Not quite jealousy, not quite admiration, a deflation, a quiet contraction. And then, reliably, the thought that follows. What does it mean that they are there and I am here? And beneath that thought, the one that costs the most. What is wrong with me? That question is one of the most energy-depleting things a human mind can entertain, because it generates 1,000 provisional answers, none of which are accurate, and all of which cost something to consider. It does not lead to clarity. It leads to a drain with no drain cover. The invisible cost. The primary cost of the comparison trap is not the emotional deflation, though that is real and worth acknowledging. The deeper cost is cognitive. Comparison disrupts attention. When you are in a comparison state, you cannot be fully present to your own work. In 1954, social psychologist Leon Festinger published what would become one of the most cited frameworks in psychology, his social comparison theory. Festinger demonstrated that human beings have a fundamental drive to evaluate their own progress and standing, and that in the absence of clear objective information, we default to comparing ourselves to others. What Festinger also identified was that this comparison tends to be upward, toward people we perceive as more successful, more advanced, more visible. And upward social comparison, conducted consistently and without conscious intention, is one of the most reliable predictors of diminished motivation and eroded self-worth. You are not measuring what you have built against what you set out to build. You are not asking whether you are moving in the direction you chose, at the pace that is honest given your actual circumstances. You are measuring your position against someone else's position in a completely different context, with completely different resources and histories and starting points. This is not a measurement. It is a distortion. There is a second invisible cost that operates on a longer timeline and is rarely acknowledged. The comparison trap progressively compresses your sense of what constitutes a reasonable pace. When you are regularly exposed to other people's visible progress, particularly in an age engineered to surface the most impressive versions of what people are achieving, you begin to believe that the quiet, steady accumulation of what you are building does not count, because it does not look like what you are seeing, and from that compressed sense of timeline, you begin making decisions about your direction, your worth, what to keep and what to abandon. Those decisions are almost always wrong, not because your instincts are bad, but because the compass you made them with was calibrated against a distortion. Why you kept it. You kept the comparison habit because it lives inside something that feels entirely legitimate. Staying informed, being aware of what is happening in the world around you, understanding what is possible. These are genuine and reasonable needs, and the comparison habit learned to dress itself in their clothing so that you would not question its presence. It is sustained by one of the oldest human fears, the fear of being left behind. The fear that while you are doing the patient, quiet, unglamorous work of building something real, the world is moving in a direction you are not on. That fear is not irrational. It deserves acknowledgement rather than dismissal. But it is not a reliable navigator. Because the fear of being left behind tends to redirect energy toward visibility rather than substance, toward appearing to be moving rather than actually moving toward something that is genuinely yours. And the drain that results from living in that gap between the appearance of direction and the reality of it is profound. It is not the kind of exhaustion that sleep repairs. The protocol. The quiet elimination of the comparison trap begins with the most grounding question in this entire video. What am I actually building? Not what you want to have built one day, not what you want other people to see you building. What are you, right now, concretely and honestly, building? Write it down, not a polished statement of intent, a private, honest answer in your own words. Because comparison is most powerful in the absence of a clear personal direction. When you do not have a specific destination, every other person's destination looks like the correct one. When you do have a specific destination, someone else moving at speed in a different direction becomes interesting information rather than a threatening measurement. The direction changes everything. The second part of the protocol is the input audit. For 30 days, you do not track what you consume. You track how you feel after you consume it. After the scroll, after the visit to someone else's page, after the metrics and the milestones and the announcements, you note a single word, inspired or diminished, not to judge the content or the person, to map your own honest response. Because some comparison is genuinely useful. It shows you what is possible. It gives you evidence that the thing you are attempting can be done. It lifts something in you rather than reducing it. That comparison is worth keeping. The comparison that consistently leaves you smaller, that produces the quiet, "what is wrong with me," in its wake, that makes your own progress feel insufficient before you have even taken stock of it. That is what you are quietly eliminating. Not awareness, not ambition. The specific, repeated inputs that feed a drain that no amount of your own effort has been able to fill. 30 days of honest tracking will make the map impossible to ignore. Unfinished loops. We arrive now at unfinished loops. The fifth and final thing you must quietly eliminate from your life, and the one that may be occupying more of your mental and emotional space than all the others combined. Because an unfinished loop does not ask anything of you out loud. It simply runs, quietly, in the background of every day. What we will name together in this chapter, with precision and without judgment, is why that quiet running has been one of the most significant and least visible drains on everything you are trying to build, and the honest, structured protocol for finally beginning to close it. The problem. An unfinished loop is any situation in your life that has not yet reached a clear resolution. It is the conversation you know you need to have and have not had. The decision you have been circling and have not made. The creative work you began with genuine intention and then set down. The relationship whose status remains undefined. The career question that surfaces regularly and is regularly deferred. The boundary that is still waiting for the right moment that never quite arrives. These are not crises. They do not announce themselves each morning with urgency or volume. They simply exist, in the background, running. And the human mind, in its extraordinary and persistent neurologically wired capacity for pattern completion, dedicates a portion of its processing power to each one. Psychologists refer to this as the Zeigarnik effect, the documented observation by Soviet psychologist Bluma Zeigarnik in 1927 that the brain holds onto incomplete tasks with significantly greater tenacity than completed ones. Her research demonstrated that we are wired at the most fundamental level to finish what we begin, and when we cannot, when we choose not to, when we defer and avoid and wait for a moment that feels less costly, the loop stays open, and the mind keeps returning to it. Even when you are not consciously aware that it is doing so, even when you are trying to focus on the work in front of you, even when you have carved out a quiet hour for yourself and sit down and wonder why you cannot settle. A portion of your cognitive and emotional energy is perpetually allocated to the unresolved, not because you are scattered or undisciplined, because you are human and your mind is doing exactly what it was designed to do. The invisible cost. The cost of unfinished loops is almost entirely invisible because the loops themselves make no noise. You do not feel a specific named pain about the conversation you have not had. You feel a general, diffuse, low-level ambient anxiety that seems to have no single source. You feel perpetually slightly behind, like there is always something you meant to do that you cannot quite locate, like something important is waiting at the edge of your attention. That feeling, that sourceless and persistent background hum, is almost always the accumulated weight of multiple open loops running simultaneously, and the deeper cost lives here. Every unfinished loop represents a form of pending emotional labor, a decision that needs to be made, a conversation that needs to happen, a commitment that needs to be honored or consciously released. That pending labor does not disappear by being avoided, it accumulates, and the longer a loop remains open, the more it costs to eventually close it. The conversation you did not have in the spring becomes the confrontation you cannot avoid by summer. The decision you deferred becomes the crisis that arrives without warning. The creative work you set down becomes the private grief that surfaces on quiet Sunday evenings, when you are not quite sure why you feel heavy, but you do. The weight of the unresolved is not loud, but it is constant, and constant is its own kind of exhausting. Why you kept it? Unfinished loops persist because closure always costs something. Having the conversation costs vulnerability. Making the decision costs certainty. The willingness to choose one path and release the others. Completing the creative work costs exposure. The risk of finishing something and finding out what the world makes of it. Setting the boundary costs potential conflict. Releasing the relationship costs grief. And in the short term, the deferral feels like the safer choice. It feels like you are buying time, buying space, buying the room to figure it out. But you are not buying time, you are spending it. Every day the loop remains open is a day of mental bandwidth and emotional energy that could have moved toward something generative, going instead toward the maintenance of something unresolved. You are paying rent on every one of those rooms, and they are not rooms where anything grows. The protocol. The quiet elimination of unfinished loops begins with an inventory. Set aside 30 minutes in a genuinely uninterrupted space. On a single page, you write down every open loop you are currently aware of, not to solve them in this sitting, not to plan their resolution, simply to name them, to bring them out of the background noise and onto a page where they can be seen clearly. Because the first cost of an unfinished loop is that it operates below the level of conscious recognition. You feel its weight without being able to identify its source. Naming it removes its invisibility. And something significant tends to happen in this naming. Many of the loops, when examined directly rather than managed peripherally, are considerably smaller than the ambient anxiety surrounding them suggested. The conversation you have been dreading may require 30 minutes of honest discomfort, and then it is done. The decision you have been circling may resolve cleanly when you finally ask the one specific question you have been avoiding. The weight was not in the loop itself, It was in the cost of carrying it unseen. After the inventory, you sort each loop into one of three categories. The first is close. These are the loops that simply need to be completed. The conversation needs to happen. The message needs to be sent. The decision needs to be made. For each loop in this category, you schedule a specific time within the next 7 days to close it. Not a vague intention, a specific day and a specific block of time. The act of scheduling is itself a form of closure, because the mind can release what has been given a home. The second is release. These are the loops that either cannot be closed or that are no longer worth the cost of closing. The project you have genuinely outgrown. The aspiration that belonged to a previous version of you. The relationship that has run its natural course. The expectation you placed on yourself at a time when you understood yourself differently. Releasing a loop is not failure. It is not giving up. It is a conscious and honest act of discernment. And the act of consciously releasing it, naming it as released and meaning it, often removes more weight than the closing of something that actually needed to be finished. There is a specific, quiet dignity in releasing what no longer belongs to you. The third is defer with a date. Some loops are genuinely not ready to be closed. They require more information, more time, a conversation that has a natural future moment. These are valid, but they cannot remain open without a review date. For each loop in this category, you assign a specific future date, a moment in the calendar where you will revisit it, assess it, and reassign it to close or release. This removes it from active daily mental management. You are not abandoning it. You have simply given it a designated home in the future and freed your present from the cost of holding it. In the weeks that follow this inventory, as loops close and release and find their dates, you will notice something arrive that is difficult to describe until you have experienced it yourself. A sense of spaciousness, not emptiness, not the absence of things. Spaciousness, a quality of mental room that you had forgotten was available to you. That is the energy that was being spent on everything unresolved, and it is yours again. Use it well. Closing reflection. You have been in this space for a long time now, and if you are still here, if you are receiving this closing reflection, then something in what has been shared found a home somewhere in you. That matters more than I can say. I want to close with something that is not a checklist, not a list of next actions, not a reminder to do anything at all. Just this. The 5 things you have been asked to quietly eliminate today were never your failures. Chronic urgency was the proof of how deeply you cared, how seriously you took the things that were given to you, how much you did not want to let anyone down. Your nervous system simply forgot, at some point, that it was allowed to rest. Emotional caretaking. Without reciprocity was the love in you looking for a safe place to land. It was the part of you that knew how to tend to things carefully, that wanted more than almost anything to keep the people around you whole. You were generous before you were guarded. That is worth remembering. The explanation habit was the longing to be truly known. It was the intelligence in you trying to build a bridge between who you are and the version of you that other people might be willing to understand. You wanted to be seen clearly. That wanting was never the problem. The comparison trap was the part of you that believed, deeply and genuinely, in what was possible. It was ambition with no clear address, hunger with no designated direction, and the pain of it, the quiet, consistent diminishment of the comparison, was always the proof of how much you actually cared about what you were building. And the unfinished loops were the things you were not yet ready to grieve, the conversations you needed more courage to have, the decisions that asked too much certainty, the works and the hopes and the versions of yourself that needed more time before they could be completed or consciously released. Every single one of them was born from something real in you, something worth honoring. The quiet elimination of these 5 things is not a correction of who you are. It is the restoration of the energy that who you are actually requires. You are not eliminating parts of yourself. You are releasing the cost of carrying them in ways that were never sustainable. And the life on the other side of that release, the life where your energy returns to you, where your attention belongs to what you have chosen, where the drain becomes a reservoir, is not a fantasy. It is the inevitable result of the quiet, steady, unglamorous work you are already beginning. In the book of Matthew, Jesus speaks to people who are exactly where you may be tonight, carrying things that were never meant to be permanent, moving through a life that had become heavier than it was designed to be. "Come to me," he said, "all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Whether you call it God or the universe, or simply the deep intelligence of a life honestly examined, the principle remains the same. You were not built to be depleted. You were built to be whole. You are not behind. You are not too late. You are not missing something that everyone else already found. You are here, doing the hard, invisible, necessary work of becoming someone who can hold their own life without constantly being drained by it. That is not a small thing. That is everything. If this space has been worth your time, if something in these ideas gave you a framework you did not have before, then staying connected to it is as simple as a quiet click. Not because the number means anything, but because the next conversation, whenever it arrives, will meet you exactly where this one left you. Please subscribe and join the community. There is a community post that accompanies this video, a single question, quiet, honest, worth a few minutes of genuine reflection. If you have the time, I would be honored to read your answer there. The thinking that happens in that space tends to be some of the most honest I encounter anywhere. You belong in that conversation.